Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head on UATV and I'm Andrii Chubyk. Ukraine must raise gas prices in order to qualify for more aid from the International Monetary Fund. Ukrainian authorities initially agreed to do so but have since postponed the increases a number of times. However, the time has come when another delay is no more an option. What changes will follow? To discuss this, we welcome to the studio Andrii Chubyk, Executive Director at Strategy 21 Center for Global Studies. Hello and thank you for being with us today.
Hello.
So, Mr. Chubyk, how much will the tariffs grow?
I would say it will depend on the final agreement between our government and the IMF, meaning that next round of negotiations, which will come in a few days, I guess, will decide then exactly on the approach to gradual or single increase in prices.
Well, Ukrainian officials have been hoping to look for some compromise with the representatives from the IMF. What compromise could we talk about? What figures would be as a compromise for Ukraine?
The general approach from this international financial institution is that Ukraine should take efforts to balance deficit of the state budget.
Yes, this is one of the requirements.
If our government will have enough strong arguments in order to say, well, we will do the slightest increase in gas prices, but we will take another couple of efforts, and altogether it will give us necessary profits, and we will do necessary steps in order to balance our state budget. It will be enough.
Mm-hmm. So you think if we balance our budget, the deficit in the budget, I do remember that the IMF requires that it should be around 2%, if I'm not mistaken, right? Then we would not need to increase gas prices significantly? That's what you mean?
Basically, in our reality, we need to increase further gas prices because right now Ukraine is in very interesting situation in terms that we have declared that we will introduce free gas market. It means that we need more or less single price for all consumers, meaning industrial and private consumers.
Mm-hmm. And so companies, businesses and individuals would pay the same
they should
rate.
Pay more or less the same price, but some slight differences could be because of the transport distance or some other aspects, but not too big. If we speak about this approach, basically Ukraine as a state has declared that it will do it next period of time together with the market for electricity. So we have to do our policy and correct our approaches to next steps in that way. If, however, our government will say, well, we will do steps in order to increase internal gas production, and in that way go to sustainability, and due to these efforts will cover all our needs, meaning for private households and industry, then we can introduce another approach, meaning that we will through special decrees regulate more or less this market in order to keep prices acceptable and affordable for all consumers.
But how much are we capable to increase our own gas production?
It will depend on plenty of different factors. So far, Parliament and government have taken steps in order to eliminate a lot of borders which we had before. In that way, private and state companies which are dealing with gas production are taking efforts to increase investments and to do more in drilling, in search for new resources. Potentially, Ukraine has quite big resources, and for next like 50 years we could be safe with regards to like 30 billion cubic meters per year for own consumption. But very important is to take also big efforts in sphere of energy efficiency, energy saving, because only combination of both efforts will then bring us independence in terms of gas.
Energy security. Yes, it's right. If the gas prices will be increased, do we have any drafts on a new formula? How will it be calculated by the Naftogaz for the businesses and for private consumers?
What we are speaking about, it's increase in gas prices not for entire Ukraine as such, but for few categories of consumers, meaning for private households, religious organizations, and I guess some other small. For Teplokомуненерго. Those enterprises and utilities which provide heat to end consumers.
But you said you mentioned private households. This is basically, well, Ukrainians, usual people.
For sure, it's each of us and the most vulnerable category of consumers, for sure.
Will this lead to the impoverishment of Ukrainians? That's what interests me.
In our reality, I would suggest that due to compromise, they will find a solution and take efforts to do gradual increase, meaning that first increase will be not so big and it will not hit family budgets too hard in next heating period.
Well, I do remember that Ukrainians could barely survive through the last winter with the high bills, but well, let's see what comes next. Now, Ukraine's Prime Minister Volodymyr Groysman was promising to use all social protection mechanisms after the gas prices can be increased. What is he talking about? What are these support or subsidy mechanisms?
I would say what government can do, it's to look on some more protection of some sensitive groups of consumers, and subsidies are the main instrument in that regard. It means that during recent years we have seen that subsidies as a system has worked quite well, and I'm pretty sure that even last changes to approaches towards those who applied for subsidies and some decrease in numbers of recipients will not bring to worse results. So perhaps if government will decide since 1st October to increase slightly prices, it will do then kind of recalculation and will see once again for those categories, for those groups of people which were rejected to be a subject for subsidies for next heating period.
But maybe would they expand the subsidy coverage, and maybe would they develop some new mechanisms? Because I think that more categories will need this state support if the gas prices will increase.
According to statistics, for the first half of this year, almost a half of previous subsidies were rejected to become a subsidy for the next period due to increase in incomes and other factors. It means that basically now government should once again look on the situation, consider perhaps some of them are anyway eligible for subsidies, and basically it means that at the same time government should also provide sufficient funds for doing this business, I would say, meaning that the subsidies should go to final consumers as prescribed, starting from the beginning of next heating period. However, at the beginning of next year, it is supposed that quite new approach will happen. Basically, so-called monetized subsidies should go then not to heat supply companies or gas suppliers, but to end consumers,
to the subsidians, yes.
And they will have the right to keep such money on their accounts to pay for consumed, exactly for consumed amount of energy, and save, if they will be enough energy efficient, they will save some money, and then at the end of heating period they could use it for another reasons.
But why this gas pricing became such a stumbling block in our negotiations with the IMF? I do remember that we received the last tranche maybe a little over than a year ago, and back then this was also the requirement that we didn't fulfill. But this time it looks like IMF is very strict and stubborn about this gas pricing. Why so?
To my knowledge, it's a final requirement which was set up in our agreements and not implemented so far. So it means that after all the other requirements being implemented, now Ukraine should do the last one.
This is the last one, okay. Well, the expert group from the IMF is paying a visit to Ukraine to decide on this new gas pricing and also on this balanced budget. What can you foresee and tell us? What would you expect from this visit?
Even the news about this group coming to Ukraine is a positive one, because it means that preliminary both sides have agreed on some compromises, and now this group will come to Ukraine and finalize and make quite a kind of text, a written text on the next steps to be done by both sides in order to do these requirements, to implement necessary steps from Ukrainian side, and then to pay from the side of IMF.
So would you expect the next tranche from the IMF, and when?
I'm not a person from financial world, but I think that our government is quite interested in getting this money until the end of this year.
Well, let's hope that, well, you said that this is a positive thing that they're coming to Ukraine. Let's hope that we will have more positive news after their visit. And thank you so much for this interesting conversation.
Thank you.
That was Andrii Chubyk, Executive Director at Strategy 21 Center for Global Studies. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more with UATV.